Hi, everyone. My name is Joyce Young, and I'm a faculty member in USF Psychology Department. As a clinical psychologist by training, my research is in addressing mental health disparities, in particular, the impact of race-based stress and trauma. But I would say if we really boiled it down, the central idea behind all of my clinical work with therapy patients and all my treatment research, at the core, it's ultimately about this question of how do we reduce human suffering? Or put another way, how can we help folks be happier? So today I'm honored to introduce Mr. Gopi Kallayil, who will be talking with us about being happy humans. Mr. Kallayil is the Chief Evangelist of Digital Transformation and Strategy at Google. He works with Google's largest clients to enhance their consumer experiences with digital technology as a primary driver. He received his bachelor's degree in electronics engineering from the National Institute of Technology in India. And he's also earned not one, but two master's degrees in business administration, one from the Indian Institute of Management and a second from the Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania. In addition to being an avid yoga practitioner and teacher, Gopi is a triathlete, a public speaker, a global traveler, and perhaps most importantly, a Burning Man devotee. He's spoken at many prestigious and high impact events, including TEDx, the World Peace Festival, and Wisdom 2.0. So we're very lucky to have him give a talk at USF. And by the way, Gopi also hosts a TV program called Changemakers. He's released multiple music albums and is the author of two books, The Internet to the Internet and The Happy Human. And today he'll be talking to us about his 2020 vision on being a happy human. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Gopi Kallayil.
Thank you, Professor Yang. It's a pleasure, privilege, and honor to be here and to be speaking to this very large audience. Even though I cannot see any of you, I feel very connected with you through this virtual forum. I want to start off this talk on happiness with a small story, and it's something that unfolded on October 4th, 2018. That was the day my new book, The Happy Human, was going to be launching. And I'd been invited to speak on Channel 7, ABC 7 TV in local affiliate in San Francisco. And at 4 p.m. I was supposed to be in the studio for an interview. So if you're an author or a speaker, that's a big deal to be invited to be interviewed on TV. And I was pretty excited. But at 4 p.m. on October 4th, 2018, I chose to do something different. I was not in the TV studio. Instead, at exactly the same time at 4 p.m., I was on a stretcher in the emergency room of Stanford Hospital with an IV down my arm, rapidly losing consciousness. Now, you might wonder and say, Gopi, what happened? Now, I said I chose to be there. Now, I didn't really make the choice. Nobody makes those choices to be in the emergency room instead of in a TV studio. But I had made a set of lifestyle choices leading up to the day that caused a complete breakdown in my system and landed me in the emergency room as opposed to being in a peak state in the TV studio. So leading up to that, over the past 12 weeks, I had traveled to 9 cities in 4 countries, and not simply traveled, doing pretty intense things. In addition to what is a demanding job in the tech industry, during the time, I'd also competed in the World Championship of Public Speaking, traveled to India to honor a passing anniversary of my father, finished my new book, produced a Kirtan Music Festival at Esalen, and as if this wasn't enough to fill someone's calendar, I'd actively participated and produced events at Burning Man that year. So with this notion that we all have that achievement and happiness and fulfillment is about doing more, I just kept pushing myself and pursuing one thing after another with this false idea that more is better. But all of this takes a toll on our body and our system, and the laws of nature are immutable, even if they're inconvenient. And at some point, nature comes roaring back, and my body went into shutdown mode. Interestingly, given the spirit of this talk and what Father Fitzgerald will talk about later, there's this notion of kindness and compassion we need to think about. To me, in retrospect, nature was actually acting with kindness and compassion. The symptoms of what led me to the hospital was that I couldn't speak. I was constantly hiccuping. I couldn't be on stage anymore. I couldn't be speaking. And for somebody who spends quite a bit of time, whose passion is to be on stage and speaking, that was debilitating. But in many ways, it's like how parents confiscate the favorite toy of the child when they don't get the child's attention, when they want the child to do something that is healthy for it, like go to bed early or eat less sugar. In the same way, nature took away my most treasured possession in order to get my attention to slow down and take care of myself. What led to my recovery was a simple formula my health coach, Anita, the South Asian Heart Center, had taught me. She would conclude every meeting with a simple statement. She said, Gopi, remember to take your meds every day. Remember to take your meds. And the meds that Anita was referring to, meds as in a simple acronym, MEDS, and the meds that Anita was referring to is not medication that comes in standard pill boxes. The meds that Anita was referring to as a portal for good health and eventually to well-being and happiness and resilience, MEDS was M for meditation, not medication, E for exercise, D for diet, as in nutrition, and S for sleep, as in rest and recovery. And let me demystify and explain each of those because they are very loaded, complex terms and can mean many things. So the M for meditation stands for some sort of a contemplative practice or spaciousness in our life. Of course, there are very formal meditation practices you can do, but at the bare minimum on a daily basis, the idea is that we create some kind of a spaciousness to step back and quieten our body and mind and to think and reflect and pause. And however the practice appeals to you, it could be a little walk in nature, it could be just sitting quietly and at the end of the day reflecting on what was amazing about the day, what are you grateful for, etc. By exercise, again, exercise is a very complex science. There are many aspects to it, but here we are talking about moving your body in some form. And human beings have been so creative that over the years, they've created hundreds, if not thousands of ways by which you can interpret the term exercise. It can be a simple walk, or it could be running, or you could be doing interval training. You could be in a gym, you could be hiking, but there are so many variants available to us. The third part of the MEDS formula that led to my recovery and actually turned out to be one of the magic formulas that leads to happiness and resilience. So D is for diet. And again, diet as in not in dieting, but the intention is to pay attention to your nutrition because we are how our energy levels, how we feel, how we think, so much of it is driven by what we put into our body. And nutrition, again, is a very complex, loaded term. There are many interpretations, and it can be even a little confusing. But here, the idea is that you pay attention and you're a little conscious of what you put into your body. The simple advice I have for people is, by and large, eat things that grow on a plant, tree, or shrub. So that came directly from nature, from a plant-based source, as much as possible, and make sure that it is as close to its natural state. And a sentence that I always tell people is eat things that grow on a plant, not made in a plant, meaning it didn't come from a factory, it came directly from nature, because the more humans seem to touch it, the more processing it goes through, the less beneficial it is to your body. And the fourth pillar of the MEDS formula, MEDS, is S for sleep, because we need that rest and recovery. And ideally, what sleep scientists say is 7 to 9 hours of rest and recovery. Nature has its cycle of rest and recovery. Plants, animals, everything seems to take time to pause, rest, recover. And we shouldn't forget the fact that we are nature too. Now, I'd forgotten many elements of this. I'd actually written about it in my book. That was the interesting thing. So I was the author of this book, The Happy Human, and all of a sudden, with that incident, I had become the unhappy human. And I had the soon-to-be famous author had devolved to be infamous during that incident. And sometimes we forget our own advice. And it is through this hard way that I had to come back to my senses about not forgetting these daily practices. But this brings up the question in your mind, why does it work? Why is this the pathway to happiness? Among many things, the METS formula. I want to give you two logical constructs to think about. The first is, if I were to ask you the question, what is your most important asset? What is your most important asset in life? And I get different answers. People will talk about their financial resources, about the house, about the job, about the education, about the family. And I would give you this provocative response that the most important asset that we all get to use, every single human being on this planet, is right here. This container, our body, our brain, and our breath, the three B's I call it. And why do I consider this the most important asset in all of our lives? It is because of two simple logical arguments. The first is that all of our life experience is being filtered by this instrument, by this asset. The food you eat is being digested by your body. If you listen to a piece of music, how you respond to the music is dependent on how the music goes into your system. If you're listening to this talk, you are listening to my words, my gestures, my energy, and based on that, it is leaving some kind of an impression on your psyche. If you were to read the next great book of literature or a business plan, all of the processing has to go through this system. There is no life experience outside of this filter. So that is an easy enough point to understand. The second thing that comes from this instrument is that all of our self-expression also has to come from this layer that we have. What do I mean by that? So whether you write the next great business plan or come up with a strategy for your company, whether you're cooking an amazing meal or designing a piece of furniture, or creating a work of art or composing a piece of music, all of the self-expression that each human being has in our lives is coming from, again, this asset, this resource that we have from our body, from our brain, from breath, from the words we articulate, the ideas that we espouse. So therefore, all of a self-expression also comes from this instrument. And I jokingly refer to it as our inner net, as a play on the internet, being that external resource that we access, the inner net being our internal resources. So all of our life experience comes from the inner net. All of our self-expression also comes from the inner net. And therefore, that leads us to the logical conclusion that the quality of our life is dependent on the quality of how this particular your inner net operates. So if you know how to put your system, your internal system, into a state of peak performance, you experience life at a peak state, you express yourself at a peak state. And that takes you to a level of fulfillment and happiness when you are operating at that peak state in terms of what your internet can do. And one simple formula by which you get to, in my own experience, is to take your meds every day, as that particular life experience taught me. So meditation, exercise, diet as in nutrition, and S as in sleep. Now, you could at this point stop and ask me and saying all of that makes logical sense, but how do you know it works? How do you know it works so well? And I will respond to that with two statements. The first is that we are lucky and privileged that living in the year 2020, we have the operating manual written for us by someone else. Over thousands of years, human beings in every culture have, by trial and error, experimented with these concepts and have figured some things out. And all the wisdom traditions have expressed this, they've documented it. So we have a large body of empirical evidence of people having tried it. And as I jokingly say, in these wisdom traditions, we have the operating manual for how to use these modalities and incorporate into our life. That's why every culture has some variant of advice on contemplative practice, on movement, exercise, whether it's through formal exercise or through dance or other modalities. Same way with food, nutrition, and with rest and recovery. But if you'd asked me this question about 30 years ago, all I could have said was, trust me, it works because others have said so, they've tried it. But over the last 30 years, the scientific community has come into this with vigor, and each of those four pillars have been researched. So there's a large body of research that is now available. We can look at very scientific data that shows, for example, neuroscientists have looked at the practice of meditation and have been able to establish what does it do to our body at a physiological level and at a mental level, what goes on in the brain, etc. Similarly, in the field of exercise kinesiologists have conducted and are continuing to conduct huge amounts of research that continues to come out that shows what it does to everything from our muscles to our heart to the secretion of various chemicals in our body like serotonin and dopamine, etc. And similarly, on the diet, the D pillar, nutritionists have conducted a lot of research, and now there's a large body of work that tells us exactly what happens when we eat more plant-based food or when we eat more sugars or processed food, and why those need to be regulated in our consumption. And similarly, when it comes to sleep, now there is an entire body of sleep researchers, sleep doctors, who look at what goes on into a body and why we need, for example, 7 to 9 hours of sleep for most human beings. So there's a large body of scientific evidence available. So putting all these together, the MEDS formula I found, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book, as a portal to happiness, because if you take your meds every day, meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep, you put your inner net into a state of peak performance. And when it's at a state of peak performance, you experience life at a peak state, you express yourself at a peak state. And that is the portal, one of the portals to happiness. But we are in a unique moment in time, given what we are experiencing with the pandemic. So you might stop and say all of that is well and good, but everyone is faced with so much difficulty at this point. There is so much suffering in this world, and the need for this hour is really resilience in being able to respond to the current situation with courage, strength, grace, and dignity. So given that, I want to acknowledge that and talk a little bit about resilience that is needed in a time like this, because in order to be fully functioning, in order to be happy, in order to be of service, we need to be resilient. So I was asked to address that particular topic in the context of what is going on, and resilience as one of the components of happiness. So when it comes to resilience, there are three things that I want you to think about. The first is, during a time like this, resilience is by design. It is not by default. And what I mean by that is we can't be resilient in a time like this automatically. We can't expect it to happen. It has to be a conscious strategy. And as we go through our current very, very strange way of living, we're not traveling, we can't go to work like we used to. We're mostly working from home, and in a time like this, if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area or many parts of the US, you're in an extreme lockdown state. Everything is so different. We can't get together with our families during the holiday season. So it is a very difficult time for everybody. So you have to think about, how do I stay resilient? How do I keep my teams, the people that I lead, the people, my family, in a resilient state? It has to be built into your lifestyle in a very, very active way. It's not going to happen, and you need to have a strategy around it. And that's what I meant by resilience is by design, not by default. The second thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to resilience is that it is dynamic, not stagnant. And what I mean by that is it's got to be built into your daily life and workflow, and it's a constant process. Much like nutrition, we don't think of it as a one-time thing that we do when we go to, say, a health vacation. Nutrition is something that we think of it as a daily rhythm in our life in terms of the food we consume. and same way with exercise and sleep. But when it comes to resilience, also you need to have that model in place that this is a daily activity, something that we come back to multiple times. And the reason I'm saying this is that I notice among my uh, associates and colleagues, for example, there's a tendency to work extremely hard. And I often hear the comments saying, I'm exhausted, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to go off to a vacation, and then for 2 weeks, and then I'll come back recovered and be ready to start again. All of that is well and good. But the operating model seems to be that 2 weeks in a year that I give myself some rest is sufficient, and the rest of the time I I, I can drive myself to an extreme level. But the resilient model will say, no, it is dynamic, not stagnant. It can be like a one-time static thing that you pay attention to a few times in a year. It is something that needs to be constantly built into the rhythm of your daily life. The third dimension about resilience in a time like this that I want to say is that resilience is actually more about an investment in rest and recovery and not endurance and grit. It's more about rest and recovery and endurance and grit. And this is counterintuitive. A common adage during a time like this is it's a marathon, not a sprint. You take it nice, slow, and steady, but there's got to be constant effort and pushing through. Or you'll hear people making statements like, I'm somehow going to power through this. And that is the operating model. But experts on this topic will tell you that this is sort of an intermittent way of operating. You find times when you have to push very hard, and then you have to actively step back and go into rest and recovery mode. And sports psychologists have a lot of models for this, and I'll give you a couple of analogies. So think of a sprinter. When a sprinter is getting ready for a burst of energy over a 100 or 200-meter run, they pour all their energy, physical resources, and the mental strength during that short burst when they're trying to burst through the 100 meters or 200 meters in a few seconds. And after that, there's an active period of rest and recovery, of slowing down, catching their breath, and doing certain routines that allows the body to slow down before they get ready for the next burst of energy. So in a time like this, our resilience strategy has to be thought of. And one way I do this is in a work situation, how I borrow that sports psychology and bring it into my professional work, is that when I look at my calendar each week, my big meetings when I need an intense amount of focus, and this is given the nature of my work, it is big presentations in front of client organizations. Those are marked in red. I color code my calendar. But immediately around those big patches of red, I make sure that there are meetings that are scheduled, or a time that is scheduled for myself that allows for preparation for rest and recovery. And I typically mark it in blue, blue being a color of calming down for me. So this way, when I look at my weekly calendar, there is periods when I know there is going to be high demands on my physical and mental energy. And right next to that, there are periods where I kind of slow down, take a break, and allow myself to pause. And this is a very, very deliberate strategy. So that is the third element that I want to talk about when it comes to resilience, which is that it is not a story of constant endurance and grit, but it's a deliberate strategy of building in rest and recovery periods as well. In fact, you're thinking more of the rest and recovery than the efforting portion. Again, a little bit counterintuitive, but something for you to think about. I want to close this off in the next few minutes with the acknowledgement that all of this general arguments are good, but each of us has to adapt this into his or her personal life, given our unique situation. I want to acknowledge and respect and honor the fact that while we are all faced with the same storm, and in that sense, it has unified humanity, because this is the first time in human history that we're dealing with a big crisis that is affecting everyone. Every patch of humanity has been affected. In the past, when we had wars and other natural disasters, we often witnessed that happening in one part of the world while the rest of the world looked on and in horror and dismay. But this is one situation with the pandemic that everybody around the world is facing at the same time. We're all in the same storm, but we are in different boats. We are in different boats, meaning everyone's situation based on their family situation, based on their personal situation, based on the community that they live in, the country they live in, can be vastly different. So I wanted to honor and acknowledge that. And I want to close this off by asking everyone in the pursuit of happiness and well-being to approach our current life situation with a little bit of kindness and compassion to ourselves. We have a tendency to be hard on ourselves, and that makes everything more difficult. But instead, let's approach things with a little bit of kindness and compassion and self-love. And one of my colleagues taught me this quote, and I want to leave you this quote to end my talk. And the quote was, "When a flower does not bloom, we don't blame the flower. When a flower does not bloom, we don't blame the flower. Instead, we examine the environment." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gopi Kallayil. Excellent, excellent teaching for our whole university community and for all of our friends watching. Kindness and compassion. These are core values to what it is to be a human person, to be a human being. And so you've reminded us to really go to the core of our very nature. Kindness and compassion give us good health, as well as a kind of a health of our soul. Here at the University of San Francisco, we rely on our Jesuit tradition. And so we like to talk about, cura personalis and cura apostolica, care for the whole person and care for the whole project. And so when a student comes in front of a professor, that professor sees that student in her entirety. She is certainly an intellectual being. She's an emotional being. She's a spiritual being. And you've given us, I think, some very good tips about how we might nourish our inner self. Ignatius of Loyola was a great fan of meditation and contemplation. And he wanted not only Jesuits, but anyone who came in contact with them to develop this idea of being a contemplative in action. So that, that mindfulness that we find in peace and quiet, we take with us then into our activity. And you've reminded us of that. Certainly exercise, we are embodied spirits, it's not a ghost in the machine. We are embodied spirits, or we are enlivened bodies, inspired bodies. At USF, you'll be happy to know that we give our students a vegan and vegetarian options. We own our own organic farm. We serve as much organic food as possible. We really help them to choose when they want to, plant-based proteins, by giving them always that option. And the only food that we serve on campus that was previously frozen is ice cream. So we try to be seasonal. And then finally, sleep. It's so important for us to rest so that we might have that energy. In the Catholic traditions, Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary, and we're thinking of the birth of Jesus in this Christmas season. Joseph had 3 contacts with God, always in dreams. So when I nodded off when I was a novice and I fell asleep during prayer, and my novice master would say, "Paul, you can't fall asleep while you're praying." I said, "Well, I'm praying the prayer of Saint Joseph, waiting for the angel to visit me in my dreams." So I wish you and yours much joy and light and peace in this holiday season as we celebrate in many different traditions. The equinox and then the coming of light as the winter begins, but also as the new year begins. To you, blessings. To all who've tuned in today, please take to heart this spiritual nourishment that you have received. And I wish you all then peace and happiness. Thank you.